thank you again for being with us on this Tuesday evening to talk about the financial aid process and specifically the federal application for student aid out there. So we're going to go over kind of financial aid basics at the beginning of the presentation, and then we're going to do a deep dive into that free application for federal student aid. And as I said, make sure that we're answering questions, kind of anticipating questions that you might have at this point in the process, and then kind of lay out what that timeline looks like for you on down the line as you're helping your student through the college search this year. So my name is Hannah Smith. I'm the new student coordinator at St. Louis University in the Office of Student Financial Services. I have my colleague Dave Rice here that's going to be kind of helping in the background, monitoring the chat, monitoring the Q&A during the presentation. This is a webinar style, so you might notice your video and your audio are off, but we do have that Q&A function and the chat function live for you to be able to pop questions in there during the presentation. We're going to kind of hold those and answer what we can in the chat, but then if anything needs to be answered live, we're going to answer that in the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. So you'll be able to see kind of the entire free application for federal student aid and then be able to get any questions answered at the very end. So just to kind of lay out some more information about what we're going to be talking about. So there's lots of things that kind of tout itself as financial aid. So we'll break down, kind of go over the basics, talk about types of financial aid and how we apply for those different types of financial aid, namely that free application for federal student aid. So we'll do, as I said, a deep dive of the FAFSA. We'll talk about who's eligible to file that, what you need to be able to be ready to file that form. And then we're going to go question by question and make sure that you know exactly what to expect when you're filing that FAFSA. As I said, too, there's lots of things that happen during the college search related to financial aid. So we'll kind of lay out what that senior year looks like for your students so you can be prepared for those big milestones and kind of have the financial aid things on your radar as well so that you're prepared for those when the time comes. And then, of course, at the very end, addressing any questions that you have. I know it can be a little daunting, this federal application for student aid, and they ask you a lot of in-depth questions, and family circumstances might be very different. So we're going to kind of talk about some of those today, but if you have a super specific question about your specific circumstance on the FAFSA, we're happy to follow up kind of offline about that and address your specific family situation there. The questions kind of for the webinar style are typically best if they're a little bit more general, but we're happy to address those questions outside of the webinar as well if you have additional questions about your circumstance. So as I said, back to basics. So when you're thinking about financial aid, really all types of financial aid can boil down into two big categories, either gift aid or self-help. So this gift aid is the free aid. This is money that you don't have to pay back. And these are typically in the form of scholarships and grants. When we're looking at scholarships, this is typically aid that's rewarding your student for achievements that they've been able to gain over their high school career. So things like merit scholarships that rewarding them for academic achievements, maybe based on GPA or ACT or SAT. Then you have the talent-based scholarships. That might be based on extracurricular or co-curricular activities that they're involved in, maybe leadership, service hours that they have conducted over the course of their high school career as well. And then if they're an athlete, if they're wanting to continue that in college, they might be getting some athletic aid to continue in their sport as well. So when you think about scholarships, those are, as I said, kind of rewarding your student for specific achievements or specific involvement that they're going to be continuing in college. When we talk about need-based aid, those usually come in the form of grants. And so grants can come from the federal government, from state institutions, and from colleges and universities themselves. And there's very different thresholds for those different types of aid from those different funding sources. This is typically where the FAFSA comes into play. So majority of sources will say we need that free application for federal student aid on file to assess you for need-based aid in the form of grants from the federal government, from state, or from colleges or universities there. Now, when we go into self-help aid, this is more aid programs that are in the form of loans, which is money that you ultimately have to pay back, or employment opportunities. Maybe your student needs to do a little bit more to actually qualify for those funds. So for federal work study, for example, your student could be eligible for federal work study, and but they still have to go out and find a job on campus, work those hours, and then that money is paid out to them like a regular paycheck would be. So works a little bit differently than other types of aid and requires your student to kind of follow some additional steps to be able to get that money paid out to them. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into the types of aid, specifically those grants that you might qualify for and loans that you would qualify for, and kind of do a broad overview of those loan programs throughout the presentation as well. Now, when we're talking about applying for these different types of aid, typically you're going to be in the pool for those scholarships, those merit scholarships, based on your student's application for admission. That's a big question that you'll want to ask the different colleges and universities that you're planning on applying to, is just making sure that you know, is the admission application also the application for merit-based scholarships, or is there a separate application that I need to file to put my name in the hat for some scholarships at that college or university? Another question to ask: universities have gone test optional in the wake of the pandemic and limited testing options. So are the colleges and universities that you're applying to test optional for admission and scholarships, or just admission? Do you need to submit an ACT or SAT score to be able to qualify for those scholarships? All good things to know as you're kind of going into the admission application and filling out those scholarship applications as well. As I mentioned, when we're talking about grant aid, that's typically where that free application for federal student aid comes into play. So certainly from federal sources, if you're wanting to get aid from the federal government, you'll need to have that FAFSA on file, but it's also what state entities and what colleges and institutions use to determine your need-based aid eligibility. If you're going after some federal aid, those are things like federal Pell Grant or the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, and your EFC, or your expected family contribution that comes from filing the FAFSA, does have to be pretty low to qualify for federal grant money. All families, regardless of their expected family contribution, will qualify for a certain threshold of federal student loans just by filing the FAFSA. So that's also another good reason to just go ahead and file the FAFSA, and make sure that that's on file so that you have that financing option kind of in your back pocket if you need it to cover that remaining balance. Now, some colleges and universities might also ask you to submit a CSS profile to demonstrate need at the institution. So this is a financial application that's going to go a little bit more in depth into your asset and financial information as a family. And this is typically asked for by more selective universities that are maybe promising to meet a certain percentage of demonstrated need for those students coming in. So it can be well worth it to submit that additional application. As a general rule, we say don't pay for free money, but the CSS profile is an exception to that rule. It does involve a fee, but it's a legitimate application through the College Board. So if you have a school asking you to fill that out, it is a legitimate ask out there. They might ask you to fill that out in place of the FAFSA or in addition to that FAFSA form. Now, if you're wanting to put yourself in the hat for the federal aid, the state aid, and need-based aid from institutions, you'll want to file the FAFSA, and you're filing the FAFSA to get that expected family contribution, or the EFC. And that number is what's going to determine your eligibility for all of that aid from those different funding sources. You can really complete the form in 30 minutes to an hour. And I say have some uninterrupted time, with no distractions, that you can really sit down and focus on what the form is asking of you, and make sure that you're reading every question thoroughly. You'll be able to see kind of what I mean by that when we're going through those questions. There's some nuance there, and there's some pretty specific instructions when it gets into the financial section specifically. And so it's nice to just have kind of some undivided attention on the form, make sure that you're reading every question thoroughly and you know exactly what it's asking of you. Some folks will say, we know we're not going to qualify for any federal aid, so, what's the point of filing the FAFSA? And we're always going to recommend that at least for that first year, you file the FAFSA and you share it with those schools that are on your students list. You never know what type of aid you might be eligible for until you put your hat in the ring for it. And just checking that box can allow a lot of aid opportunities to open up for your students. So just think of filing the FAFSA as a way to kind of set them up for financial success, make sure that the box is ticked and you're not leaving any money on the table there for your student. There are some eligibility criteria for folks that would be eligible or ineligible to file the FAFSA. And these first two are really things that you don't have to worry about. If your student is planning on attending an accredited university, they're going to be enrolled in an eligible program of study. This doesn't mean that they have to be admitted to a school before they can add them to the FAFSA or submit the FAFSA. And it doesn't mean that they have to have a decided major to be able to file the FAFSA. As I said, if they're going into an accredited university, they are eligible to file the FAFSA if they have those other eligibility criteria ticked. So they can go in as undecided into a university and still be eligible to file the FAFSA. The big ones are they have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, and you have to have a valid social security number to be able to file the FAFSA and qualify for federal aid. Now, as I mentioned, you're filing this Fafsa form, this free application for federal student aid, to get an expected family contribution, or what we call an EFC. So this is a federal methodology that uses both student and parent income and asset information to determine essentially how much you can contribute towards your education as a family in that academic year. Now, if you are a family who has filed a FAFSA before and seen your expected family contribution, you are likely in the majority of families that says, you might be shocked by how high that number is, or you might be thinking that's not a realistic expectation of how much I can pay towards an education. We know it's not a perfect science, but it standardizes our eligibility criteria a little bit for awarding aid on the institutional side. And then certainly, making sure that the limited resources at the federal, state, and institutional level are going to families that truly need it to be able to help with their cost of education. At all of these different colleges and universities that you're looking at that are on your list, they're going to publish a series of direct costs and a federal cost of attendance at their institution. So as you're kind of sifting through university websites, looking at, the tuition, the fees, the room and board, and kind of trying to calculate what that cost looks like for your student to attend each year, that institution, you're probably looking at those direct billed costs. So those direct costs are essentially costs that are billed through the university that are owed to the student account. And essentially, you can think of these as kind of services rendered. So you're paying tuition because your student is enrolled and attending classes at that institution. They have some fees because that's rolled into all of their student activities and all the amenities on campus that they have. They have access to the gym or access to sporting events and things like that. And then room and board, they are living in a room on campus in a residence hall or an apartment, and they're using a university meal plan. So those are all things that are billed through the university, like I said, that are owed to the student account at the end of each year. The federal cost of attendance includes those billed costs at all of these universities, but it also includes a series of estimates for things like books and supplies, transportation expenses, personal expenses, loan fees, and that represents your maximum budget that you can accept aid up to in all forms. So you can have scholarships, grants, and take out loans up to this full cost of attendance at these different institutions. Now, your cost of attendance at these different colleges and universities that you're attending is going to be very different based on if it's an in-state or out-of-state institution, based on public or private. Those costs are going to vary wildly based on school. Your expected family contribution that you get when filing the FAFSA is going to remain constant at all of those colleges and universities. So all schools are going to see that same number. And because that cost of attendance at those different schools is variable, your EFC remains constant, but then your need at these different institutions is going to vary based on that cost. So this could be why, at Z University, you are not qualified for any need-based aid because your need is too low. And maybe you are qualified for some need-based aid at X because your need is higher there. When we talk about the federal student loan as well, the need is what's going to determine what portion of their loans is eligible to be subsidized. So with their loan eligibility, they could have a portion of their loans that essentially the federal government is paying the interest on while they're in school. Those are the subsidized loans. And then there's also unsubsidized loans where interest would be accruing while the student is in school. And so based on this need number at those different institutions, your student might be eligible for a certain portion of their loans to be subsidized. And we'll talk more about that federal student loan program here in a bit after we talk about the FAFSA. So as we go into looking at the FAFSA form, really the big item that you need before you start that free application for federal student aid is an Fsa Id. So you'll need this for the student that you're filing the FAFSA for and at least one parent that's listed on the FAFSA form for that student. The Fsa Id is essentially a login to federal student aid, and it also serves as your electronic signature. So both the student and the parent will have to sign at the very end of the form to formally submit the FAFSA. So you'll need, again, a student Fsa Id, and at least one parent that's on the FAFSA will need an Fsa Id. As I mentioned before, it can be completed in about 30 minutes to an hour, but that's uninterrupted, undistracted time. So you'll see when we kind of go through it, we'll talk through what those questions are, and you'll come equipped with all of that information that you need to be able to just plug all of that information into the FAFSA form. The FAFSA goes based on prior tax year. You might have heard that term, prior. All that means is that we're looking 2 years in the past to determine the income and tax information that we're reporting on that FAFSA form. So for seniors this year, you are going to be filing the 23-24 FAFSA because you're applying for aid for the 23-24 academic year. If you're starting in fall of 23, you're going to be filing that 23-24 FAFSA. So that means it's going to be asking you about 2021 tax and income information for both the parent and the student. So you'll need your federal tax return, W-2s that show wages earned, and then any financial records. And you'll be able to see what exactly financial information you need when we get to those questions on the FAFSA form tonight. You'll also need your current account statements and investment records. It's going to ask you what's the total balance of your cash checking savings accounts, what's your investment net worth, your business net worth, and we'll make sure that's really clear what information you need to put on the FAFSA so that you have all of that information ready when you're actually filing the form. And then in the FAFSA form, your student has an option to add up to 10 colleges that will receive their FAFSA results. So they can put up to 10 at a time. They only need one to formally submit the FAFSA. So if you don't have a solid list of colleges or universities that your student is looking at or planning on applying to quite yet, that's perfectly fine. You could add a university that's kind of on their radar at this point, and then go back in and add schools later on to their FAFSA as well. To establish that Fsa Id, we're going to be going out to studentaid.gov, where we're going to file the FAFSA, and you're going to create, again, the Fsa Id for the student and one parent that's listed on the FAFSA. It will take about 1 to 3 days to authenticate your Fsa Id because it's tied to your Social Security number. It has to go through some external validation with the Social Security Administration. So you'll get a notification after you create your Fsa Id once it's been fully validated. but you will be able to use your FSA ID immediately after establishing it to be able to log in and get into the Fafsa form and start that form. This FSA ID will be yours for life because it's tied to your social security number. So these are the credentials that your student and you as the parent are going to be using throughout the entire time that your student is planning on applying for aid. So you'll want to keep that information in a safe place and make sure that information is distinct from your students. Every FSA ID has to have a distinct mobile number and email address that's associated with the FSA ID. So parents, you'll just want to make sure that you are not establishing your student's FSA ID with your email or vice versa. It gets really confusing if you're trying to create both the student and the parent at the same time and go through all of the multi-factor authentication and everything to verify the email and the phone number on file. So I think this is a really great way to kind of pull your student into the process early, create some autonomy with them, have them create their own FSA ID. It does not take long at all. You'll essentially put in your biographical information, you'll answer some challenge questions, and then you'll be good to go with your credentials there. So once we have our FSA ID, we're gonna go into the Fafsa form. So I'm gonna actually walk you through step-by-step, question by question, this Fafsa form. So this is the homepage of studentaid.gov out here. So this is the federal student aid homepage. There's lots of different things out here, financial aid resources. This is where you'll, of course, file the Fafsa, but it's also where your student will come back to manage their loans and loan repayment if they take out any federal student loans, or if you are taking out a Parent Plus loan to help with your student's cost of education as well. This is kind of the site to do that. So studentaid.gov. And you can quite literally Google Fafsa form or federal student aid, and it should be that first link that comes up. Just make sure you're on a .gov and of course not paying to file the Fafsa, because that first F in Fafsa stands for free. So never pay to file the Fafsa form. But this is what it should look like out there on studentaid.gov. And we're going to go to Fafsa form because I'm assuming you already have your FSA IDs created. If you don't have your FSA ID created, if you're going out here for the first time, you're just going to click create account, and that's where you'll be able to create that FSA ID and then go into the Fafsa form from there. But right now we're assuming that you have that Fafsa or the FSA ID created. So we're going to go straight into Fafsa form. It's this first option in the menu here, and then complete the Fafsa form. Once you get into the form, it's going to ask you your role. So you can go in as the student, as the parent, or as a paid preparer. This third option is very rare. So you likely will be going in either as the student or the parent. We're going to be going in through the student role tonight, but it's just as easy to go in through the parent role. If you do click I'm a parent and filling out the Fafsa form for a student, you'll just put in your student's information, their name, date of birth, social security number, and be able to get back into their Fafsa. As I said, we're going to click I am a student, and then it's going to give us the option to log in to continue. So we'll click continue and log in with the student's FSA ID, username, and password. So you can either use the FSA ID username that's set up, the email account on file, or the mobile phone on file as your username. And there is a way to recover your username and recover your password if you've forgotten those credentials in between creating them and getting ready to file the Fafsa. Once we log in as the student, it's going to take you to this home page to ask you which form you are applying for federal aid, for financial aid. So as you can see out here, when you go out there, you'll see the 22-23 Fafsa form still open. That's for students that are applying for aid in this current academic year. But you'll want to go into, for seniors in the room, the 23-24 Fafsa. So any juniors, sophomores, or younger kids or parents in the audience tonight, you're not going to be filing the Fafsa this year, but you'll know exactly what to expect come next year when you're filing that 24-25 or 25-26 Fafsa out there on federal student aid. So for our purposes tonight, we're going to click 23-24 Fafsa form. And then it's going to come to the save key. So you'll have the option to put in a save key. This is a password or a PIN number that both the parent and the student should know so that you can save your place and get right back into the place that you left off. So you don't have to finish it in one fell swoop in one sitting. You can save your place and go back in later if you would like to with this save key. This introduction in the form is kind of just some FAQs that a lot of folks might have as they're entering this financial aid process or Fafsa process. So feel free to read through these questions and click the little arrows down to read the answers if you're really worried about how long it's going to take or what happens next. And then you'll click continue and you'll be in the Fafsa form. So as you can see up here, it'll give you these breadcrumbs all throughout the form so that you know exactly what section you're in. And if you ever get confused about, okay, it's asking for your social security number and you're the parent filling it out. Do I put my information? Do I put my student's information? It gives you this little reminder up here that the FAFSA does belong to your student. So if the FAFSA is saying what's your social security number, your first name, that means they are referring to you and your as the student that's filing. You can also always kind of look up and say, okay, we're in the student demographics section. So that means I'm going to be answering questions about my student. Same thing with parent demographics. You flick up and you're, okay, we're in parent demographics. We're answering questions about the parent. So should be pretty self-explanatory when you're going throughout, but it does trip some folks up with that you and your. A lot of this information in the demographic section will be pre-filled because it's associated with your Fsa Id. So things like social security number, first name, last name, date of birth, those are all things that are going to come in with that Fsa Id information if you log in as the student. Same thing with email address, telephone number. One quick note about establishing an Fsa Id for your student and what email to use. So depending on the school district and the school's regulations on how long they keep those school email addresses, you might recommend to your student that they create their Fsa Id with either a college email or a personal email that they'll retain access to well beyond them graduating high school. If they do put in a school email address, I would just make double sure with the school that you're able to retain access to that because that is going to be tied to your Fsa Id for many, many years to come if you're applying for aid throughout your time in school. So email address, telephone number, again, those are going to be associated with the Fsa Id. Mailing address will establish residency in a certain state. And so it's going to also ask you, have you lived in New Hampshire or your state of residency for at least 5 years? And there is conditional logic throughout the form. So based on your answers to certain questions, there might be some additional questions that pop up that you have to answer. So for instance, here, if you said no to this question, it would ask you, okay, where were you a resident before New Hampshire and how long have you been a resident of New Hampshire? When did your residency begin? It's going to also ask if you are a U.S. citizen. So it'll ask, it'll give you the options of I am a U.S. citizen, I'm an eligible non-citizen, or I am not a U.S. citizen or not an eligible non-citizen. So that question there is going to determine the eligibility moving forward in the Fafsa form as well. The student education piece, there are a few questions in here that kind of trip some students up sometimes. So high school diploma, most often if they're coming out of high school, they're going to have that high school diploma when they begin college in 23-24. Now, even if they're going into an accelerated degree program where they have, they're going into a 6 years master's program for physical therapy or occupational therapy, some students will put master's degree here because or graduate degree because that's the degree that they're ultimately pursuing, but they have to get their bachelor's first. So you'll select most often first bachelor's degree here, and then it'll pre-populate. Will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin the 23-24 school year? It'll say no automatically based on that response. Again, this is one that kind of trips students up sometimes that have concurrent or dual enrollment credit. They see this never attending college and they say, well, that's not me, I have college credit. But the Fafsa form is saying concurrent or dual enrollment credit doesn't really count towards your status as a college student. So if it happened concurrently while you were in high school, you're still going to select never attended college first year for this question on the Fafsa. Now, it's also going to ask your student if they're interested in work study or interested in being considered for work study. I always recommend you say yes to this question just to kind of maximize your options there for additional aid possibilities for your student. It's not required. If you say yes, you still have multiple options to either opt in or opt out of that work study program. So it's not required if you say yes to follow through on that. You're just, again, maximizing your student's aid eligibility there by kind of raising their hand for federal work study eligibility. Student driver's license, if they have one. If they don't have one, then you don't need to worry about putting that information in. And then this is the first of a dependency question that we see. So throughout the Fafsa form, it's going to ask a series of dependency status questions that's going to allow the Fafsa to give your student a determination of dependent or independent. So if they're dependent, that means they have parental support and they will need to put their parent information on their Fafsa form. And you'll see as we go through this dependency status section, specifically what those types of qualifying things are to make a student independent versus dependent. If a student is independent, that means they don't have to provide their parent information on the Fafsa, and they can skip past the parent demographics and parent financial sections and go straight to the student financial sections. This is one of the first dependency questions here. So it's going to ask if your student was a foster youth or in the foster care system at any time. And then this is collecting some first generation college student information here. So what's the highest school completed by parent 1 and parent 2? This gives them the opportunity to add their high school. So they will either search by city and state or high school name or a combination of all three and click search. And it's going to give them a list of all of the high schools that meet that criteria that they searched. They'll select their high school from the search list, click continue, and then be able to verify that high school information. So, yep, it's Anacostia High School in Washington, DC. And as you can see, as we're going through the form, we successfully completed all of the student demographic questions. So we get a green check mark there. And now we're in the school selection. So we just confirmed our high school, and it's going to take us right into the college search here. So this is where your student is going to put in all of the colleges and universities that they want their FAFSA results to go to. They can put up to 10 at a time, as I said. And they can search by, again, city, state, and school name, or by federal school code. So federal school code is easily Googleable for schools. You just type in St. Louis University FAFSA code, and it'll come right up, and you can search the schools by our FAFSA code as well. So it's going to do the same thing. You put in the city, state, and school name there, and then it's going to pull up a list. As you can see, these are check boxes where you can select multiple at a time. So if you type in, if you go back to the search and you just say Missouri, you're going to be able to, and search, you're going to be able to see a list of all of the colleges and universities in the state of Missouri. And you can just kind of go through and click all of those that you're wanting to add to your FAFSA form. It'll tell you once there's 10, once you've reached that max. And then for every school that you put on your FAFSA form, you're going to have to complete a housing plan preference as well. So you have the options of on campus, off campus, or with parents. And if you're a first-time freshman, you're likely not eligible to live off campus, but you might be eligible to live with a parent if you live kind of within a commutable distance to campus. I always say, go with what you're leaning toward at the time. But if you are truly on the fence, select on campus. And then you can always change it on down the line, talking to those colleges and universities. You can always make that adjustment on down the line. As you can see here, we answered all of the school selection questions. So we got a green check mark there, and we're on to the dependency status section. So then now it's going to ask student marital status. This is another dependency question. So if the student were to say married, they could be classified as an independent student on the Fafsa and not have to provide their parent information. This example, the student is single. So we're going to click continue. And then it's asking if the student, so the student that's filing the Fafsa, do they have any dependent children of their own? So they can say yes or no to that. And then any other dependents that they provide financial support for. And they can say yes or no to that question as well. These are some additional dependency questions that are going to make that determination of if your student is dependent or independent on the Fafsa form. So things like active duty, armed forces, if they're a veteran, if they are an orphan, in foster care, or were a ward of the court, if they're an emancipated minor, or if they're in a legal guardianship. So if any of those count or apply to their specific circumstance, they'll click that checkbox and click continue. In this test case, we're saying none of the above. And then it's going to ask the homelessness filter question as well. So were you homeless, or were you, again, the student, self-supporting and at risk of being homeless anytime after July 1st, 2022? So answer that question and click continue. And then based on those answers that they put on the Fafsa, they weren't able to answer yes to any of those specific dependency questions. And so they have been deemed dependent, and they will have to provide their parent information on the Fafsa. So they have the option here to say, I will provide information about my parents, or I'm unable to provide information about my parents. If they say I'm unable to provide information about my parents, it's going to skip the parent demographics and financial section, but likely it won't be able to calculate an expected family contribution for that student. There is usually some additional verification that has to happen at the institutional level to be able to validate that status and allow an EFC to be calculated for that student. So if a student is deemed dependent, they will have to provide information about their parents. So then we go into the parent demographics section. Before that, it will kind of lay out who is considered a parent on the Fafsa and whose information should I provide on my Fafsa form. This is what the actual form is going to look like. So it'll kind of walk you through these different scenarios, but I think this flow chart is easier to look out for our purposes tonight. So who is my parent when I fill out the Fafsa form? So the student is going to think, are my parents married to each other? If they're married, both are going to go on that Fafsa form. If they're not married, but the parents live together, again, they're both going to go on the Fafsa form. If they're not married and they don't live together, the student is going to determine who they lived with more over the past 12 months, and that's going to be the parent that goes on the Fafsa. If it truly was equal in terms of time spent with each parent, you're going to determine as the student which parent provided more financial support for you over the past 12 months, and that is the parent that's going to go on the Fafsa. Now, if you're determining who you spent more time with or who provided more financial support, and that one parent, you've decided that's the parent that's going to go on the Fafsa, if that parent is remarried, then they will have to put their spouse's information, so your step parent information, on your Fafsa form as well. As I said, it's going to have this information within the Fafsa form, so you have those prompts to kind of determine, okay, who's the parent that should go on the Fafsa form for my student. Once you get into the parent demographics section, you'll say parents' marital status, so married or remarried. So that tells the Fafsa that two parents are going to go on the Fafsa, either the both biological parents, both adoptive parents, or one biological parent and a step parent. And it'll ask, when did your parents get married or remarried? So what was the status of that marital change there. And then you're going to add information about the first parent. Now, it does not matter what order you put first parent or second parent or parent one or parent two. And it doesn't matter who has the FSA ID. Just one parent will need the FSA ID, and it doesn't matter if they're parent one or parent two on the FAFSA. So you'll put all of your parent information in there for first parent, and then again for second parent. It's also going to ask parent state of legal residence, just like it did the students. And again, conditional logic here. So if you were saying no, it's going to ask you, okay, where are you legal resident? And when did you establish residency in New Hampshire? This is also a question that kind of trips people up because it feels like they're kind of asking the same thing on these two questions. But if you read carefully, so first off, we're looking at this banner and we're saying, okay, I'm not including myself as the student in these numbers here in these subsequent fields. So how many other dependent children do your parents have? So if I'm thinking about other dependent children that my parents have, I'm the youngest of 4. So I would not count myself in that. I have 3 siblings, so I'm going to put 3 in this field here. And then this question is asking how many other dependents do your parents have? So these would be folks like a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle that live with you, that your parents provide financial support for, but are not their dependent children. So not siblings, but maybe extended family or family friends that are staying with you that your parents are providing financial support for. And so you would put in whatever number of other dependents or however many other people your parents are providing financial support for that are in their household. Now, when you go to the next page, you can kind of check your work with your numbers here. So it's telling you your household is 5. So you can kind of think through, okay, I am a student, I have 2 parents, I have 1 sibling, and then there's grandma or grandpa that lives with us. So our household size is 5. That checks out. If you get to this screen and you say, oh, actually, our household size is 6 or 4 or whatever, if it's different, you can click back to previous and go back and make sure that those numbers are correct that you're adding for dependent children and other dependents there. Now, this question is asking you out of those 3 dependents, so the student's sibling, and then the parent's other dependent that also lives with them. So out of those 3 dependents in your parents' households, how many will be in college for the 23-24 aid year? So there's going to be at least 1 because the student is filing a FAFSA for aid for the 23-24 aid year. So there's going to be at least 1 there, but there could be up to 3 if all of those dependents are going to be in school for that 23-24 aid year. And that's just in college. That's not if you are in elementary, secondary, or high school. So we're done with the parent demographic section. As you can see, we have a green check mark there, and we're on to parent financials. So this is where it's going to give you the option to put in some tax information for your 2021 income tax return. And it's going to give you the option to go out to the IRS and use the IRS data retrieval tool, or the IRS DRT. That's going to allow you to go out to the IRS website and port in your tax and income information from your 21 return directly into the Fafsa form. So we highly recommend you use this option. It's going to tell you if you're eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool and then give you the option to go out to the IRS. So again, highly recommend using the data retrieval tool if you're eligible for it. It's going to ask you which parent has the FSA ID credentials. So are you Q Wallace parent 1 or Q Walter parent 2? So you could toggle between the 2 based on who has the FSA ID. And then you're going to put in your FSA ID credentials and it'll take you out to the IRS form. Once you get out to the IRS, it's going to pre-fill some information based on your FSA ID. and the tax filing questions that you just answered on the Fafsa form. So it's going to port in your first name, last name, social security number, date of birth, and your tax filing status. But then you will need to manually input your street address exactly how it shows on your 2021 federal income tax return. So it's helpful if you have that tax return in front of you so you know exactly the address information, how you filed that 21 tax return. It has to be exact down to, like if you said ST period and you on your tax return and you're trying to put in the full name of street in the data retrieval tool, it's not going to be able to match it, and you're not going to be able to port that information over. So put in your address information exactly how that shows on your 21 tax return. And then if it's able to match your federal tax return, the information that you put in there, it's going to give you the option to transfer your tax information into the Fafsa form. So you'll click this little box and then this will become, it'll light up and you'll say transfer now. Once you click transfer now, it'll take you back into the Fafsa form and it's going to give you this little confirmation that you've successfully transferred in your 21 IRS tax information into the Fafsa form. And then everything that came over from the IRS is going to be grayed out in the Fafsa and say transferred from the IRS. So you don't have to worry about editing that information or augmenting it in any way. You'll have that information preserved as exactly as it showed on your 21 tax return. There could be some instances in which you are ineligible to use the data retrieval tool. So the Fafsa asks you, as you saw, what's your marital status as of today? So if the parent marital status does not equal the tax filing status in 2021, so maybe you were married filing joint taxes in 2021, but as of the day that you're filing the Fafsa, you're divorced or separated, you would be ineligible to use that data retrieval tool. If you are married but filing separate, again, it can't port two tax returns using that data retrieval tool into the form. So you would unfortunately be ineligible to use the data retrieval tool and have to enter your information manually there. As I said, the Fafsa form will tell you if you are eligible or ineligible, and then you can kind of make that determination if you want to go out to the IRS, if you have the option. Now we're going to go through the parent financial sections as if we did not use the data retrieval tool, just so you can see what questions it's going to ask you and make sure that you have that information readily available if you're not able to use that data retrieval tool. So it's going to ask what your adjusted gross income for 2021 is. Again, this is the parent financial section. So it says parent information, parents. So it'll give you these little cues throughout the form to let you know exactly what information you're entering where. It's also going to tell you where exactly to find that information. So for those of us that don't have our adjusted gross income just on the top of our heads, you're going to go to your IRS form 1040, scroll down to line 11 and put that number in the Fafsa form here. Same thing with income from work. So how much did your parent one earn from working, salaries, wages, tips in 2021? So it's going to tell you exactly where to find that information. Your parent one portion of the IRS form 1040, line 1. If they filed a Schedule 1, you're going to add in lines 3 and 6 in box 14 in there. If they didn't file a Schedule 1, you don't have to worry about adding that information in there. You can just disregard, just look at that line 1 on 1040. You're going to find your portion of these wages listed on your tax return. If you're filing a joint return, you can find your portion using your W-2 really easily. So have your W-2s handy for this question to determine what is your portion of that income from work. Now, as I mentioned, there is some conditional logic throughout the form. And so there is something called a simplified path. So based on your adjusted gross income and your wages, you could qualify for the simplified path determination that would allow you to skip some additional questions about parent income and assets. So if you get this question, it is perfectly fine to say, yes, I do want to skip the remainder of the questions and I don't want to answer. So this is asking you, you might qualify for the simplified path But did your parents file a Schedule 1? If they didn't file a Schedule 1, you're going to say no. And then it's going to ask you, okay, do you want to skip the remaining questions about you and your parents' income and assets? So again, you can definitely say yes to this question if you would like to, if you qualify for that simplified path. For the purposes of the demonstration, we're going to say no, and we're going to continue on in that financial section. It's going to ask you the amount of income tax for 2021. Again, it's telling you, okay, go to your 1040, look at line 22, that's on the second page, and that's the number that you're going to be putting in the form there. These additional tax filer questions are the ones that get kind of in the weeds about some additional income or additional things that might have to be reported on the FAFSA. This is the section that is really good to have that undisturbed, uninterrupted time where you can make sure that you're reading every question really thoroughly and seeing if it applies to you. If you know it doesn't apply to you, just skip it, leave a 0 in the field, and continue on with the form. So read through these questions, see if they apply to you. The majority of these questions, folks will not have every single one filled out. So there will be some, or the majority of these, that will not apply to you. Big things here, you might see student college grants and scholarships and get a little bit confused. This would be if the parent is in school and receiving grants or scholarships in excess of their tuition, and that would be the number that goes here. So that's likely going to be 0 unless the parents are in school themselves. Education credits might be something that you have listed on your 1040. If you have a 529 plan that you've been using for your students, untaxed portion of IRA distributions or pensions. Again, it's going to tell you exactly where to find this information. So if you're like, oh gosh, I don't even know if I have untaxed portions of IRA distributions, I don't know what any of those words mean. You can look on your 1040 lines 4A plus 5A and see, is there anything listed there? If there's not, you can leave the 0 in the field and move on. You can also use these question marks next to the fields. If you click on this, this is going to give you some additional information about where to find that information or additional information about what's going to go in that field. So if you have questions as you're going through, definitely use those help texts to see what additional info you need to put in there. Again, child support paid. There's also a child support received question in here that kind of trips folks up sometimes. So just read thoroughly, make sure that you are kind of catching the questions that apply to you and disregarding the questions that don't. Again, this taxable earnings from need-based employment program, so federal work study, this would be if the parent is in school and a part of the federal work study program. If it's the student, you don't need to report it in this section. This is the parent financial section. We're continuing on. Again, child support received. So that question earlier was child support paid. This is child support received. This is one that commonly trips folks up to: payments to tax deferred pensions and retirement savings plans. You're going to look on your W-2 form in box 12, and you're going to only put the number that shows next to these specific codes. One that's really common that's on a lot of folks' W-2s is this code DD. That's employer contributions to like an HSA account or a health savings or health benefits. So don't include those if you see that code DD. Only include the codes that explicitly show in this question on the Fafsa form. Okay, so this is where we get into questions about assets. So we answered information about income, and now we're on to assets. And this is, again, parent financials. If it gives you this determination, if you have the option to skip, you can absolutely say not yes, but it's up to you if you want to say yes or no here. It's going to ask you, as of today, what's your father's or your parents' total current balance of cash checking and savings accounts? So you'll kind of add up all of your cash checking savings accounts into one lump balance there. And you don't necessarily have to get down to the dollar or a super exact amount, but it should be representative of what is in those accounts at that current time. Net worth of investments. So when we're talking about investments, we are talking about investment accounts, mutual funds, bonds, stocks, any 529 or college savings plans or UGMA or UTMA accounts that the parents have in the students' names, any investment accounts that are not specifically earmarked towards retirement. And that means not in a specific retirement account, not just you saying this is money for retirement. That's what's going to go in that investment box there. This is including real estate, but you're not going to be including the home in which you live. So your primary residence does not count in your real estate assets here. This would only be for additional homes outside of your primary residence or any real estate holdings that you have investment in. It's also going to ask current business or investment farm net worth. And this is only for businesses or investment farms that have over 100 employees. So the majority of folks won't have to answer that question about business or investment farms. Again, this is some additional information about what assets do go in, for instance, that investment field. So real estate, again, other than the home in which you live, UGMA, UTMA accounts for which you're the owner, stocks, bonds, certificates of deposit, anything like that. Assets that you don't include, namely value of life insurance and your retirement plans, specifically your 401k, your pensions, your annuities, your IRAs that are non-education. Things like that would not go in that investment net worth question on the FAFSA. So that's all the parent financial questions. Again, we've got a green check mark there, so we're good to go on the parent financials, and we're on to the student financial section now. So it's going to ask them the same tax information. So have they filed 2021 taxes? And then that's going to determine if they're eligible to use that IRS data retrieval tool. If the student filed taxes in 2021, they could also be eligible for that data retrieval tool to just port in that information. If they didn't file taxes, they wouldn't be eligible to use that data retrieval tool, and they would enter their information manually there. In this case, the student did file taxes in 2021, and they were deemed eligible to use that IRS data retrieval tool, so they can go out to the IRS, follow those same instructions that the parents did, enter their address information into the IRS, port that information over into the Fafsa form, and then they would also complete some additional income and asset questions that the parents did as well. So we would answer those same tax and income questions for the student. And then we get to the summary. So as you can see here, we've got green check marks on all of our sections, all the way up to sign and submit. So all that we have to do right now is review all of our answers that we've submitted on that Fafsa form, make sure that everything is correct, and then we're gonna formally sign and submit. So every question as you're going through the Fafsa form, you'll be able to see your answer that you put in there. And if you say, if you're here and you see, oh shoot, it says second bachelor's degree here, and it should be first bachelor's degree. If you click on the question, it's a hyperlink back to that section, back to that specific question, to let you make those edits within the form, and then you can just kind of skip through all of the remaining sections to get back to the summary to sign and submit. So you can edit your information all the way up to formally submitting it. So as you're going through, make sure you're just reviewing all of the information that you put in there, making sure that it's correct. Anything that comes over from the IRS will just say transferred from the IRS, and it won't have an actual number value in there. So the only number values that you'll see are numbers that you manually typed in if you're entering that information manually. So it's going to give you a summary of every single question that you answered on the FAFSA. And then this is new this year. There's a little demographic survey, but none of these questions will affect the aid eligibility for the students. So the student is going to be filing or filling out these questions at the very end of the form. So gender, ethnicity, race, and then clicking continue. And then they'll get the terms and conditions. So essentially this is telling you by signing this application, you are validating that all of this information is true and correct to your knowledge. And this is what's going to happen if you are purposefully lying on this form, things like that. So you're going to acknowledge those terms and conditions. Click continue, and then you'll have the signature options. If you're logged in as the student, when you go into the form, and you fill out the form under the student Fsa Id, they're going to acknowledge the terms and conditions, and then it's automatically going to electronically sign for them because their Fsa Id, it serves as their electronic signature. If you're not signed in as a student, you'll have the option to select what method you want to sign the Fafsa form. So this should by far be the majority of applications you are going to sign electronically with your Fsa Id 99.999% of the time. There are other options to be able to sign it, but they take much longer and elongate that processing time for you to be able to figure out what that expected family contribution is. So you should always be signing electronically with your Fsa Id. Once you select sign electronically, you'll be able to enter your Fsa Id credentials and sign as the student. And then it's going to ask for the parent signature. The parents will have the same options, either sign electronically, print the signature page, or submit without signatures. Again, 99.9% of the time, you should be signing electronically with the Fsa Id. You're going to select that option. You're going to put in the parent Fsa Id information, click continue, and then you'll formally sign and submit that Fafsa form. Once both the parent and the student have signed, you'll submit the form and come to this congratulations page where you'll be able to see your confirmation number, the date and time in which you submitted your Fafsa form, and you will automatically be able to see your EFC. It will calculate it for you unless there is something that needs to be validated with your information on the Fafsa form. So it will show you your expected family contribution pretty immediately, and it will also show you the federal aid that you're eligible for with that expected family contribution as well. So as we're going through the form, again, seniors this year, you're going to be filing that 23-24 Fafsa, and you're going to be basing that on the 2021 tax and income information. You'll need to establish that Fsa Id before you start that Fafsa form for both the student and one parent that's going to be listed on the Fafsa. Use that IRS data retrieval tool within the form if you're eligible for it, and then definitely use those question marks, use those help tools throughout the form as well. Once you formally sign and submit the Fafsa, it will fully process out on the federal side, and the student will get a student aid report that will again show them that expected family contribution, the federal aid that they're eligible for, and some information about kind of what happens next. It'll also give them information about the colleges that they included on their Fafsa form. And then once that Fafsa is fully processed, they're able to go back into federal student aid, log in with their Fsa Id, and either make corrections or add and remove schools to their Fafsa form as well. With the Fafsa information, schools are then going to be equipped to give you a financial aid offer. And these offers are going to show your student the cost of attendance at those different colleges and universities, all of their scholarships, grants, loans, work opportunities that they were deemed eligible for on that federal application for federal student aid. And it's going to give them essentially a remaining balance or an out-of-pocket cost that it's going to take to attend that institution for a year. One of the things included on that financial aid offer is going to be that federal direct student loan. So as I said, just by filing the Fafsa, you are putting your student's name in the hat for federal direct student loan. So it doesn't matter what that expected family contribution is, they'll get a certain amount of federal direct student loan eligibility that they can use then for their cost of attendance at any university that they're wanting to attend. So for freshmen, you're going to get $5,500 in a federal direct student loan. And then if you'll remember me talking about the cost of attendance minus your EFC will get you need at these institutions. So based on that need, you might be eligible for a certain portion up to $3,500 of that federal direct student loan to be subsidized. And again, the subsidized portion is not accruing interest while your student is in school. So if they qualified for the maximum subsidized loan, they would have $3,500 in a subsidized loan. Again, that's not accruing interest while they're in school. And then they would have the remaining eligibility, the $2,000 in an unsubsidized loan that would be accruing interest while they're in school. They will have increasing eligibility for subsequent years. So their sophomore year, they'll have $6,500, and then junior and senior year, they'll have $7,500 in federal direct loan eligibility as long as they continue to file the Fafsa. As I said, there's lots of things happening in the senior year as it relates to the college search. So lots of things to kind of keep your eyes and ears open for. Right now, seniors in the room are probably in the thick of submitting those applications for admission, really paring down your list and starting to think really critically about where you can see yourself next year, right? So maybe going on some in-person college visits, talking with people on those campuses, getting a feel for what academic life is like there, what social life is like there, and determining, what you envision your college experience to be. Now, October 1st, that Fafsa opened for this coming academic year. So any juniors or sophomores or underclassmen in the room, just know that subsequent Fafsas for subsequent aid years are going to open on October 1st. So you'll be looking for that October of your senior year to create your Fsa IDs and go ahead and submit your Fafsa. November is pretty early to start receiving award notices from different colleges and universities. Really, you'll start receiving those in earnest in February or March after the start of the new year to give you an idea of what that financial piece looks like and hopefully have all of the information that you need to then make your final decision by May 1st. So you'll submit your enrollment deposit by May 1st. Kind of solidify your enrollment there, accept any financial aid. And then May through June is really for kind of getting your ducks in order, making sure that you have a plan for recovering that remaining balance at that institution and starting kind of laying the foundation for those financing pieces. So if that means applying for a Parent Plus loan, if that means going out and applying for private or alternative loans, and then completing the steps that you need for that federal student loan as well. And then crunch time, July and August is, really kind of getting down to the wire. You're going to start classes in August. So making sure that your enrollment is finalized, your housing is finalized. You've got all the fun stuff for your dorm and maybe attending summer orientation and making sure that everything is kind of ready to go and set in place before you get to campus. A lot of times schools are going to give you that first bill come July. So you'll have an idea of what you truly owe to the university come July. Maybe make that first payment in August once you've solidified your payment arrangements and then kind of get set up for the rest of the semester as well. So now anybody can go ahead and create their Fsa ID if it's not already created. As I said, if you're a junior, sophomore, freshman, you might want to hold off for a little bit creating that Fsa ID just to make sure that you remember those credentials when it comes time to actually file your Fafsa. If you're a senior in the room, the Fafsa is open and ready for you. So go ahead and file the Fafsa. And now is a good time to kind of start laying the groundwork and laying the expectations, managing your students' expectations for how we're going to pay for college and what that's going to look like and whose responsibility is it to pay for tuition or housing or fees. And how much of that is on your student's plate and how much of that are you going to pick up the slack for and help with as the parent. I think that's really important and a step that's kind of missed a lot of times in this process because everything is going super frantically. And then it's a little too late come August when you're trying to stare down that bill and making that first payment to have that conversation about whose responsibility truly it is to cover that balance. Every school is going to have a net price calculator out on their website that will kind of give you an estimate of what aid you might be able to be eligible for at that institution based on some quick academic factors and quick income and asset factors there. So definitely be using those net price calculators to kind of get an idea of what your aid might look like at those different colleges that you're considering. And then certainly use your resources, be that your high school counselor to talk about scholarship opportunities. Use your resources on the college side as well. You likely have an admission counselor that's assigned to you at those different colleges and universities that you're looking at. So use those resources at the college level. We're eager to answer your questions and make sure that everything is kind of set up and ready to go for your college search. So definitely use us on the college side. And we want to make sure that you have all of the information that you need to make a really informed decision for you as a student and as a family of where you're going to attend college and where you're going to kind of make the most of your time there. Okay, so I've talked to you quite a bit tonight. So I'm going to open it up for questions that y'all have, things that we weren't able to address during the presentation, anything that y'all have.
I think we had a lot of questions in the very beginning just around Fsa Id, just clarifying that we need one Fsa Id for at least one of the parents and a separate one for the students that it works as their signature. Had several of those kind of questions. It's been a busy evening just in the, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. And I think hopefully everybody got their questions answered. And if not, we're still watching that for you to submit more questions. And just maybe clarify a little bit, there were questions about, do we file a Fafsa for the student and for the parent, but know that they're just combined, it's just one.
Yeah. So you kind of saw the breadcrumbs, like I said, throughout the Fafsa form. So that's all just one form that you're filling out. You're putting both the student and the parent information on that one form, both signing and submitting your student's Fafsa there.
This is an asset question. Do we, on our question thing, do we have the screen that shows the assets, what we include, what we don't?
Yeah, so life insurance would not be included in that investment number. Let me toggle back to that. Okay, so yeah, value of life insurance. If it's specifically a life insurance investment, then that would not go on the Fafsa form in your investment net worth question there.
Question about if an employer offers tuition benefits, where do I report that? That's not specifically necessarily on the Fafsa. It depends on how it. There's a question on the Fafsa that talks about scholarships that or work study that you have to report. You only report anything like that on the Fafsa if you had to pay taxes on it, if you had to include it on your tax return. Guys are. Do I have to accept what is offered, such as if only loans are offered, can we decline them?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's money that you have to pay back. So schools are certainly going to have some extra fail-safes in place to make you, explicitly accept or decline that amount in specifically federal student loan eligibility. And then you'll also have to sign a master promissory note out on studentaid.gov and complete loan entrance counseling for that money to actually pay out. So there's lots of kind of fail-safes in place so that you know full well this is money that you're going to have to pay back. And that entrance counseling kind of walks through what your repayment options are as well, making sure that you're really well versed in your repayment options and your obligation on down the line for those federal student loans as well.
Still several questions. So did I understand correctly that if the parent has a legal if the student has a legal guardian, he is considered independent?
Yes. So that's a question that will determine that dependency status there. If they say, yes, they are in a legal guardianship, they are considered independent on the Fafsa. That's one that it might require some additional validation at the institutional level. So the specific schools that your student is looking at might have to collect some additional information. And so in SLU's case, we're going to ask them to fill out an independent validation form that essentially allows them to explain a little bit more about their situation. And then in the legal guardianship circumstance, we would ask them to provide those legal guardianship, legal paperwork so that we are able to validate that status and move forward with considering that student independent.
There was a question about, is it okay to go ahead and file the FAFSA now for A+ programs because they thought they remembered seeing something about it said to file during your student's last semester of high school. But no, that not only is okay to go ahead and file, you'll want to go ahead and file that.
Yeah, and that is required for the A+ program. So you'll need to file the FAFSA if you want to utilize that A+ program for Missouri students.
Just a quick FSA ID question. And so if we have 2 students in college as of 23-24, we have to create 2 student FSA IDs and 1 for the parent. Yes, 1 for each of the students and 1 for at least 1 parent.
Yeah, so you can use that same parent FSA ID on the 2 student FAFSAs, but the student will need distinct FSA IDs there that are associated with each of their applications as the student.
I think this is a 529 question, but if we don't answer this correct, let us know. It says, do we have to separate out the amount we have set up for first child separate from our second child's amount on the account?
Yeah, so you will have to answer if parents are the owner of 529 or UGMA or UTMA accounts like it shows here on the asset net worth screen here. You will have to provide that total amount for all of your students that you have in 529 plans or UGMA or UTMA accounts in that investment net worth. Now, it's not going to separate out, okay, how much do you have in a 529 plan specifically? It's going to be lumped into that investment net worth question. So you will have to answer for the total amount of your investment accounts, even though you're just filling out the FAFSA for that one student. That's also a good kind of reminder that once we want that to go in the parent financial sections for you as the owner on those accounts. Those don't go in the student financial section if they're listed as the beneficiary on those accounts. The student information, the income and assets is actually weighted a little bit heavier in that EFC calculation than the parents is. So you'll definitely want to make sure that that information is in the parent financial section, not the student financial section.
Quick question on alternative loans. It's not letting me post things in the chat right now. So the question is, are there any specific private alternative loans that you recommend?
So I think this really depends on those private or alternative loans typically are credit qualifying. And so you'll have to go out to those different lenders. We typically recommend starting with lenders that you already have established lines of credit with. So if you have a credit union that offers student loans, or if you already have a line of credit through a place like Discover that offers student loans, they might run some kind of promotional interest rates for existing customers or things like that. But for private or alternative loans, really the name of the game is seeing what you get pre-qualified for, seeing what that interest rate you get qualified for is, and making sure that you are kind of setting yourself up for success and minimizing the amount that you'll have to owe over that repayment term. So making sure that you're getting the essentially lowest interest rate and the most flexible terms there for repayment on those private or alternative loans. Typically, institutions will have a preferred or a historic lender list out on their website. So if you were to go to our website, St. Louis University, and type in private or alternative loans, you you would find our historical lender lists that our students have worked with in the past to secure private or alternative loans. But really that's just kind of a starting place, and then on you to, as I said, go get pre-qualified and see where you can get that best interest rate. Okay. What do you do to have to link your children's Fafsas if you have more than one college student? So I think this used to be an option. And I've been at a few FAFSA completion events this year where parents were looking for that link on the confirmation page and weren't able to find it. So I don't know if it's something that federal student aid has done away with, but as the parent, you'll be able to see both of the students' information in there. But Dave, do you have some additional information on if they can link the FAFSAs?
No, I have the same thought you did. That doesn't feel like we're seeing that this year. But if you have students of different ages, the returning student, you can do the renewal app, and it is so much faster because it pre-fills all of the demographic information. So that would be much faster.
Yeah.
Still a few more questions we have. My son started the application, but he used the school email address. I'm assuming the high school email address. Can he change it to a different email address?
So yeah, I believe he can go and update his communication preferences and add a different email address to his Fsa Id. I'm not exactly sure if that changes his account email to that personal email that he changes it to, or if it will forever be tied to that school address. But there is a way to update those communication preferences in his profile once he logs in to federal student aid out there.
If your child is adopted, do you check ward of the court? And I want to make sure we answer this correctly. I'm assuming that you, the parent, have adopted this child, and at that point, they're just your dependent.
Yeah. So any adopted parents would be considered the parent on the Fafsa form.
Is a private loan the same as a Parent Plus? If not, where do you secure a Parent Plus loan? They are different. Private loans, they are just private lenders. The Parent Plus loan is a federal loan. All of the federal sites have been moved to one. There was another question about fafsa.gov or studentaid.gov. All of the FAFSA, the student loans, everything is moved to studentaid.gov. So you would go to studentaid.gov and you can follow the links to actually do your Parent Plus loan application. It's where your students will do their required federal entrance counseling and their master promissory notes. Private loans, the process can vary a little bit from school to school. Like Hannah said, they may have a preferred list or just a historical list, but each school will kind of have the list of lenders. It's an online application, so you don't have to like go find a lender or something like that. But they're not the same. Private is separate from parent.
Yeah. This next one, I filled out the FAFSA application as a parent, but haven't submitted it yet. Does my student have to fill one out too? So again, you're filing one FAFSA, your student's FAFSA for each aid year. So it'll be the student and the parent information in that one form. So they can go into the FAFSA that you've already started for them, unless you have started filling out that application as the parent and putting your information in the student demographics and student information sections. In that case, it might be a little bit easier to just go ahead and start over with your student and make sure that it's all of their information in the student sections. And then you can kind of come in the parent demographics and parent financial sections to add your information.
The question that says, so the tax return is from 21, but the assets are from this month. The assets that's the famous FAFSA phrase, as of today. What's in those accounts and so yes, that's correct. It's as of this month or as of the day that you are filling it out. I think that's all the questions that we've had come in. You have any let us know. But I think we've gotten through everything that was submitted in there. Great questions tonight, guys. We had lots of great questions. Make sure that we've answered.
Yeah, and as we're waiting on those final few questions to come in, I just want to pop our contact information up on the screen here at the very end. Just so you know, we are here and available to answer any additional questions. As I said, I know it can be kind of hard to ask super specific questions about your financial situation in front of a bunch of strangers on a Zoom. So feel free to reach out to us. You can specifically request me as Hannah Smith if you email our sfs@slu.edu, just our general email here. Or if you just want to say the blonde girl that was on the webinar, that email will come to me too. But certainly reach out with any additional questions. And as I said earlier, use your resources on the college side, be that admission counselors or those financial aid professionals. We are here to help and want to answer your questions. And it can be a really daunting process, but it doesn't have to be confusing and you don't have to do it alone. So please feel free to reach out.
This is the website fafsa.gov, the same as studentaid.gov. Fafsa.gov is gone now. I mean, it's just, if you typed fafsa.gov, it would link you over to studentaid.gov. But it's the other, they're just all at one site now. If your student is living at home, will he enter the information as independent? The independent status, remember Hannah took you through that whole section of those questions that determined whether they were independent or dependent. More than likely, if they're living at home, they are dependent. But just because they're not living at home does not automatically make them independent. You have to be able to say yes to one of those dependency questions. And thank you to all of you. So many of you are saying thank you in the Q&A, and thank you all for coming and attending.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate you spending your Tuesday evening with us. I know it's not the most alluring topic to talk about financial aid, but hopefully we've answered some questions that you have on your mind here. So
under income, should I include my pension disability income? I don't file taxes or receive a W-2.
Yeah, so there's a field, I believe it's the very last question on the parent financial section that's other untaxed income, so disability benefits or unemployment benefits or things like that. So that information would go in that last field there in the parent financial section. You, as a non-tax filer status, would just go through the parent financial section and you would say, when it asks you, what was your 2021 tax filing status, you can say will not file. And then you'll enter all of that information in manually. So you'll still kind of flow through those financial screens. You won't see the tax filer questions, but you'll be able to see those additional income and asset questions and kind of flow through those screens and put that information in the correct field there. Well, we are at 8 o'clock, so definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you again for joining us on this Tuesday evening, and hopefully it was helpful. Please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. We will be posting a recording of the whole webinar, and our slides are available on our website. So we'll be sending out the information to all of the attendees and all of the registrants that were unable to join us tonight. So look out for that and be sure that you continue to come back to us and use us as a resource for the financial aid process throughout your college search as well. So thanks again for spending the evening with us. Have a great rest of it.
Thanks, everybody.